there, welcome to Hans Wargaming. My name is Justin. In this video we're going to be making some industrial catwalks, gangways, bridges, whatever you want to call them. First up we're going to make some sprue walkways. Initially I was going to do 3 copies of the same bridge, but I got a little carried away and I ended up doing 3 different versions of these. I'm going to quickly run through each one of these. They're all pretty simple. Each one starts with a basic sprue frame glued to a piece of heavy cardstock. I didn't bother cleaning these up too much. I just grabbed my snippers and removed the extra bits. Most of that frame is going to be hidden or covered in rust anyway, so it's not really necessary in my opinion. For the Sprue Gangway with railing, I used the rounded off end pieces from the sprue that I cut these sprue frames out of as hand railings. I sanded off any logos and adorned them with some stir sticks. I glued those railings onto the ends of the first bridge and cut a few stir stick pieces out to act as moldings along the floor. The stir sticks make it look like there's some panels on the floor, and they also help hold the railings in place. The painting process was pretty simple for these first 3 gangways, so I'm going to talk about that after the assembly portion. For the basic sprue walkway, I just cut out a few rectangular pieces of cereal box cardboard. I glued them on top of the cardboard base with some wood glue, leaving a bit of space in between each one. If you put them too close together, they tend to blend together, and it's also kind of difficult to dry brush them. I turned that walkway upside down and weighed it down while it dried to keep the panels from warping. Then I added some rivets. It took a bit of trial and error to get this rivet technique figured out, but yeah, it's super easy. I'll talk a bit more about it later on in the video. For the third sprue bridge, I wanted to try something a little different. This one's kind of an amalgamation of different ideas I had and I wanted to try out. It actually ended up being double-sided, which in itself is kind of an interesting idea for a bridge. So first I took some plastic straws and cut a sliver down each one with some scissors. Then I clamped them down to the sides. The straw's tension just holds it in place. On the top side, I ran a bead of glue along the straws and glued a stir stick up against each one to add some support. On the underside, I added some scrap pieces of sprue, again to add some support. Then I cut out some cardstock panels and glued them over that, similar to the basic sprue walkway. To finish the ends off, I cut out some popsicle stick ends. This is one of those rare occasions where you actually use those ends because they fit over the straws so well. Like with the previous bridge, I added some rivets to the metal panels. On the other side, I decided to start laying out some stir sticks. This is a piece I cut off of one of those straps that they use to hold boxes together, and I kind of think it looks like a metal grate, so I glued one of those on each end, and then I just glued some stir sticks in between. And I added some more stir stick pieces on the sides as a final molding. I base coated these gangways black, and then sporadically sprayed London Grey over top of that. I stippled Necromancer Cloak on each one, followed by Uniform Grey and Ash Grey. I also added some rust effects to the metal panels using some rust pigments and Mod Podge. The plastic straws got a coat of Necromancer Cloak. Again, Uniform Grey and Ash Grey stippled onto the metal plates, followed by rust. On the other side, I base coated the wooden planks with a skeleton bone. Once that was dry, I applied some Elfwood Brown dip over top of that. I painted the metal grates with plate metal, of course. I dry brushed plate metal on the other side as well, and finished everything off with a dark brown wash. And finally, I did a second pass using the old rust pigments. This time I applied the pigments with some IPA. After a day of drying, I coated them with a matte varnish. If you're wondering how I made that DIY super glue accelerant, it's just baking soda dissolved in water. I'll be doing a quick tutorial video on this for my patrons. As a patron, you can watch this video and all of my future videos ad-free whenever you want. That's a new thing I'm trying out, so if you want to skip those ever-increasing ad breaks and help support this channel in the process, check it out. Now onto some more complex walkways. Heavy-duty catwalks. For these bridges, we're going to use some half-inch wire fencing, and we're going to bend it in such a way that we're going to be using one continuous piece for the left and the right side handrails. The fencing is going to start on one side and then wrap underneath the bridge, kind of sandwiched between two pieces of material, and then over to the other side of the bridge. I've seen people use this fencing for railing before, but I haven't seen anyone use it in this particular way. I thought it might result in a stronger end product, and I think it did. I guess time will tell. First, you have to figure out how long and wide you want the catwalk to be, and then cut a piece of fencing to match that. I used a metal square to get a nice straight edge, bending the railing to form dips on both sides of the bridge. It really helps to have a pair of needle nose pliers for this, getting those nice straight bends. I made sure to cut all the wire nubs off so they were flush with the railing. I didn't trim the wire nubs off by the floor because the flooring is going to extend past the handrails about a half an inch and cover that up. The first one looked a little rough. I didn't really get my process down until the third bridge. For the flooring, I used some scrap MDF board. This MDF board is an 1/8 inch thick. It's very sturdy, which is really important for this build. You need something pretty sturdy for at least one side of this. I used that for the one side and cut out some thick cardstock for the other side. I also doubled up some stir sticks to sit in the dips at the bottom of each railing. At this point, the sticks are just tension fit in there. Once I was happy with the placement, I went in with some CA glue and glued them in place. For the longer bridge, I used popsicle sticks for the sides, and I think those worked a lot better. They help cover up the flooring and fill the space much better than the stir sticks did. I definitely recommend using popsicle sticks or something similar instead of stir sticks. They just look way better. If you're using MDF sheets and you have a table saw, that would be a good option. You could cut some maybe like 1/2 inch strips of those. I glued this catwalk sandwich together with clear Gorilla Glue. This glue is super strong and great for bonding things like this. It does take about an hour or two to set, so you have to clamp the pieces together while it dries. I laid a second piece of MDF over the top of the cardboard just to hold it flat and keep it from warping, and I clamped everything together using 2 clamps for the small catwalk and 3 for the larger one. This glue is pretty runny and it doesn't really take paint well, so you do have to be careful with it. You want to keep the bridges flat to minimize dripping for at least the first 20 minutes. I cut a few lines on the tops of the floors to add some texture, but later I decided that the lines wouldn't really stand out enough, so I added some raised floor panels, using those lines as a guide. I finished off the edges with some stir stick moldings and gave everything a nice dousing in thin CA glue. This is Starbond super glue. I recently started using this stuff and I really like it. Having precision tips for my CA glue has kind of been a game changer. I honestly don't know how I've made it this far without using them. As always, I'll have a link to the products used in the description below. So next I wanted to add some rivets. I bought these resin dots at Joann Fabric. I've always kind of dreaded doing rivets because they seemed so tedious. But once you get the process down, it's really not that bad. It took some trial and error, but I finally figured out the best way to do it. And for me, that's to put a couple dots of super glue down where you want the rivets, and then apply the rivets with a matchstick or something similar. Just dab that matchstick in some super glue so the dots will stick to it, and then just plop the dots in place one by one. Give the matchstick a little twist and the dots should stick in place. It goes a lot faster than you would think. As you can see, I'm flying through this. Look how fast I'm going. Look at me go. Like with every bridge project in this video, I spray painted these catwalks black and then spray painted them sporadically with London Gray. It took a bit of testing to get the color scheme figured out. These bridges were the first ones I made. If some of these steps seem a bit redundant, then that's why. Don't feel like you need to follow every step here. I ended up stippling progressively lighter grays on the floor panels, from Necromancer Cloak to Ash Gray. I also added some fur brown as a rust undercoat. For the rails, I gave them 2 coats of Damon Yellow. I felt like the catwalks were way too dark, so I stippled 2 coats of ash gray on the flooring, really building up the texture. Then I mixed up some rust. For the rust, I used some Vallejo pigments and Mod Podge. I also mixed a little bit of fur brown paint with that. I can't really say I recommend that. The paint is a bit glossy, and I think that kind of comes through a bit. I was kind of testing to see if it would seal the pigments, and it kind of did, but I still felt like I needed to apply some varnish to seal the pigment in place. Anyway, then I decided to go in with some plate metal to give the panels a bit more of a shine and tone down the rust a little bit. At that point, I gave the catwalks a dark brown wash. And finally, I went back in with some more rust. This time I wanted to try using some mineral spirits and raw pigments. I did mix a little bit of fur brown with that. I was still trying it out. The spirits evaporate quickly, so I think you really get a nice effect applying rust this way. I started with rust pigments, then I went in with some old rust pigments to build up some tonal depth. I did end up having to seal the bridges with a matte spray varnish, which wasn't really a big deal. I always try to mention to at least give it a day to dry before varnishing. That's a lesson that I've had to relearn several times. For our final project, and my personal favorite project of all these projects, we're going to make some pipe access catwalks. For this one, we're going to be using some pre-cut strips of metal mesh. Originally, I cut these strips out for my fence project, but I decided the mesh didn't really look like it was the right scale for a fence. But for graded flooring, I think it's going to work pretty well. These strips are 1.5 inches wide. I cut these out of some office letterboxes. You can find all sorts of office products that use this type of mesh, usually at the dollar store or Salvation Army or Walmart. You can find them almost anywhere really. It's a pretty common material. For the rest of the frame, we're going to use some plastic sprues again. Ideally, you want to find some sprues that have a fairly straight grid pattern on them. You can get pretty creative with the layout of these bridges, as you'll see. So after cleaning up the sprue, I cut a strip of mesh out to fit over this blocked out section. That's where the actual walkway is going to be. And then on the other side, I'm going to lay some pipes. That's going to give this catwalk twice as much surface area for minis to walk on. So for the pipes, I used plastic straws, and I had to hide the ends of those straws somehow, so I chose to build some boxes on either side of the bridge, using popsicle sticks for the edges. Then I ran some straws from end to end. These boxes are going to hide the straw ends and make it appear like they go into the ground. At least that's the intended effect. I also used a few of those extra sprue pieces as spacers to space the straws apart. With this bridge, I put spacers in between the straws, leaving 2 on the left and 2 on the right, but you can space them out however you like. I completed those end boxes with a piece of cardboard and added some stir stick moldings to clean up those edges around the grates. By the way, I did a 7-part scattered terrain video on pipes if you want to see more videos like this. Next, I cut out some railings using that 1/2-inch wire fencing that we used in the previous build. This is typically how you see this stuff used, and there's nothing wrong with using it this way. You just have to add a little piece of wood on the end to hide that seam and give it a little bit more support. Next, I traced and cut out some pieces of cardboard to sit on the underside of those boxes, and they also act as end pieces for the grates. I also added some cardboard to the underside of the railing, and I cut some J-shaped pieces of sprue out to build out a little platform here on the top of these pipes. I thought that looked kind of cool. That's going to help protect those squishy plastic straws, and it's also going to give me a place to mount some hazard strips later. I glued a generous amount of resin dots, aka rivets, to all the metal panels. I was really getting the hang of the process by now, and really just enjoying the rivet placement process. Like with all the bridge projects in this video, I gave them a base coat of black spray paint with a patchy coat of London Grey. I painted the pipes with some Necromancer cloak, and I also dry brushed that onto everything else, just catching the edges. Then I dry brushed on some plate metal. I was mainly focused on the metal panels and the mesh here. And I also brushed that plate metal in one direction over the tops of the pipes to give them a bit of a shiny look, like they were catching the light. The catwalks looked okay, but I felt like they needed a bit more contrast, so I went in with some ash gray. I just stippled that onto the tops of the upward facing panels. I used that for pretty much all of the panels that were on the pipe side. The stippling really gave those metal panels an aged look. For the hazard strips, I pre-cut some stir sticks at about the length that I wanted them for each side of each bridge, 6 in total, and I spray painted them black. Then I taped them down to a cutting board with some masking tape. To get consistent lines, I started with one stir stick, and I traced a line along the edge of that with a hobby knife, and then I laid out some more stir sticks side by side, cutting a line in the tape each time. Then I carefully peeled off each piece of tape and gave the whole thing a coat of matte Mod Podge. This prevents the yellow paint from getting underneath that tape. Once that was dry, I painted 2 coats of yellow on top of that, and then just carefully peeled everything apart, and that's how I made these hazard strips. You might need to clean up the edges with some black paint. After a bit of trimming, I just glued those onto the edges of the catwalks. And once again, I applied a little bit of rust, mainly just focusing on the rivets and the areas where I thought water would pull. I finished it off with a dark brown wash, and that's that. Pipe access catwalks, there you go. That about wraps it up. Hopefully this gave you some ideas. It's always nice to have some bridges. They can really add a lot of options to your gaming tables. A big thank you to my wonderful patrons. If you want to support what I do here, Patreon membership is a great way to do that. That's it for now. Hope you have a good day, and I will see you later.